Exam 1 covered part 1, the quiz is part 2, covered part 2. Deadline is Friday, October 19th, at end of day, 7:59 to 9 p.m. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 16th, also end of day. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th, day of the Show of Infamy. And exam 5, the exciting final, covering all the things if you need it. Deadline is December 14th at noon. The paper draft deadline November 9th, plus 5 deadline November 14th, emergency deadline November 21st, and desperation deadline December 8th. Before going on to our new stuff, talking about substances and substrata, anything about the previous stuff to be, or the squirrel apocalypse. It needs more stuff. It's actually kind of like a squirrel bonanza. All the trees knocked down, all those acorns everywhere. It's like feasting time for them. They'll get big, sad, and then really get really angry and take over. They'll learn how to work chainsaws. That's the next step. Okay, so last time we were looking at the notions of substance and substrata, and the contest here is between if you assume that you want to accept the trope theory, and who wouldn't. Do you accept the substrata to support them and hold them, or do you embrace the bundle view? And so it lays out many of the battles of this. Now, in metaphysics, when it comes to problem universals, the main contenders are what are known as tropes, which are kind of a, truth be told, they're kind of a recent minor player. And then you have the classic views of immanent universals and what are called transcendent universals. Now, we've already seen the transcendent universals from our good dead friend Plato. Because Plato kept his universals where?
Plato. Yes. He didn't do God. It was an intellectual thing.
Hey, you're right, you're pointing out.
Yeah.
Platonic have some strange place beyond space and time. Yeah, so his universals are not here, they're someplace not here, or it's even a place, and they somehow cause stuff here. Now, his student Aristotle accepted what today would be known as immanent universals. Not immanent like in imminent disaster, but immanent as in they're here. So, immanent universals work like this. If you like the universals, which are things that can be multi-located, but you think the Platonic heaven is crazy, this is the choice for you, because it avoids the weird Platonic heaven, but keeps the universals. So, what's it got going on? Well, basically this. It accepts that there are universals, and the universal in this case would be a property that can be wholly and entirely located at different locations in a dimension at different times. Multiple location deal. And we went through last time the analysis of the bag of marbles. So if you bought immanent universals and you had a bag of 6 green marble or blue marbles, you would say that there would be 6 marbles, there'd be 1 universal blue, 1 universal for the shape, and so in the bag there'd be 6 objects, and there would be, just counting those universals, there would be just the universal shape, the shape of the marble, the universal blue, and the universal size, etc. So for each universal, just one thing in the bag. So people accept them in universals, say their universals are real, they're here, and they're wholly located in different places, which is their big mystery. How does that work? Now, with the trope theorist, as we saw before, the bag of marble example, the trope theorist would say, if you got 6 marbles in there, you'd have 6 objects, the marbles, then you'd have 1 trope for each marble for its color, 1 for each trope for the size, and so you'd end up with a lot of stuff in the bag. And so the mechanism of saying why these are all blue would be exact resemblance rather than identity. Now, on one hand, it may seem like the trope theorist ends up with less economy because you get a lot of stuff in the bag. But, as we'll see, tropes are, of course, better. So what's the core battle between tropes and universals? Suppose you're a trope theorist, like myself, and then you're a universal theorist, which I should have brought one, forgot. Sorry, I think I left them at the bus stop. Sad. Hate when that happens. Now, if you were asking a universal theorist and a trope theorist, do you believe in properties? They would both say, yeah. Are you a realist about properties? Are they real? Yeah. Are they metaphysical entities? Yeah. So how do they differ? Well, one main difference is this. For the universal theorist, they believe that each instance of a universal, like blue or whatever they're doing, they're identical in each case. It's literally the same thing, not like identical like we talk about identical twins, but identical like is in perfectly equal, the same thing. So in terms of how many universal blues there are, there just be the universal blue. I mean, for each shade, it would be universal, but it'd just be that one. And it would have 6 instances, but they're all the same thing. Now, the trope theorist says you would have 6 exactly resembling blues. They're not identical, they're exactly resembling. Now, of course, a clever universal theorist would say that's pretty sketchy because exact resemblance seems to be just a tricky way of avoiding identity. But the trope theorist argues and contends that exact resemblance, better than identity, makes more sense. So tropes, separating from universals, here's how they differ. They're properties, so that's the thing they have in common, but they can only be, as we saw with meeting yourself, one place at one time. So they behave pretty normal. They can't be in multiple locations. Now then, since we've laid out, universals versus tropes, now we get into the substance and substrata. Now we saw a bit about substances in the ancient past. And a substance, as they saw, is what? What can they do?
They collect characteristics.
Yeah, they group together characteristics, and they have the capacity to, going back to Descartes' definition, Aristotle's definition, they exist in a way they don't depend on other things.
Right.
Not in the sense they have like financial independence, but in the sense that they can exist on their own. Now, other thinkers have used the term substance for other stuff. One is the real essence of things, which sounds like a good alternative band, real essence, or perfume, or why not both? Real essence, wearing real essence, playing in a nightclub called real essence. Also, as you mentioned, is supposed to be that which supports and groups together the properties. And another, which is similar to the essence thing, is a thing's most essential properties. Now, I'll go with the Cartesian definition. Namely, it's a thing that can exist on its own. Now,
Can I ask you a question before you go?
sure.
Because you moved from the other side. The tropes. So the people that believe in the universals, which is, let's say, God, and the people that believe in the tropes, are they saying that the tropes replace God or instead of God or what?
Oh no, if you're a trope theorist and you believe in God, you'd believe that God would be presumably composed of tropes. And people who believe in universals, if they believe in God, would believe that God was composed of universals. In fact, in the Middle Ages, one of the arguments for there being universals was you needed universals to make sense of the Trinity. Because in the Trinity you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And are those supposed to be 3 beings or just one?
One.
Yeah, that are somehow 3. So the question is, how can you have 3 being 1? And universals magically solve that problem, because you have God, the universal God, who can instantiate himself as Father, Son, or Holy Ghost, and so it's 3 being 1. So it solves the problem of the Trinity.
Well, I mean, we mind, body, and spirit. The spirit of the man, the mind of the man, the body of the man. So that's the same thing, you ask me.
Yeah, if you look at it, And Plato himself also had came up with that notion of the intellectual part, the spirited part, and the desiring part, which Freud later stole as the superego, ego, and id. Actually, just stole Plato's stuff. Did a lot of cocaine. Basically, if you do enough cocaine, you can't really be blamed for stealing stuff. You don't know what you're doing anymore. It's true, you did tons of cocaine. Lots and lots.
Who did the cocaine?
Sigmund Freud.
Oh, it's the penis envy, that's where you lost me.
That's right.
Penis
This-
envy.
Whenever you're reading Freud, you just remember this guy was doing a lot of cocaine. Doesn't mean that he's wrong, but it just gives you a new perspective on his work. Because cocaine is a hell of a drug. Not that I know from personal experience. Definitely not. I'm a professor, I can't afford cocaine. That's a pricey 1990s drug. And this is the 2000s, maybe that's cocaine in the 2000s. Yeah, that's just several, unless you're doing like it ironically, I guess is a hipster cocaine. So we'll go with that definition of substance. And if you believe in God and tropes, you would have God being tropes. And then, yeah, that would create a bit of, yeah, no, that's an interesting question, because no, I've never read anybody who tried to like explain the Trinity using tropes rather than universals. And so maybe that would be an argument against tropes, that you couldn't have a Trinity. So the substance can exist on their own, not dependent on the things. Now, so a question in metaphysics, also physics as well, is what sort of entities can kind of like free roam, that can exist on their own, that don't require other things to exist. Now, one way to look at it is just super simply. Things can do it or they can't. But of course, if you end up with a world that's kind of complicated, you could have a world that's got a dependency hierarchy. You know, kind of like an org chart for a company. And so there could be, in a complicated world, various relations between things where things depend on, say, higher level things that depend on higher level things. And at each level, you could have like different levels of substance. Things that can exist on their own relative to each other, but then depend on something at a higher level. So in this case, the definition of substance generally would be this. And of course, you've got to throw in some variables. So you'd have any entity would be a substance of a particular level if and only if its existence is independent of all other entities on that level. So the basic idea is, suppose you get something like the folder. Well, it would be a substance if it didn't require anything at its same metaphysical level to exist, like other objects. So could there be, you know, a universe with just the folder? And the answer would seem to be maybe. You know, or could you have a universe with just one folder? Yeah, and so we probably say that a folder, you know, or objects, I mean, true, we have like emotional dependence on each other and financial dependence, but in terms of our actual existence, we don't depend on each other in that sense. So if the folder like was destroyed, other things wouldn't cease to be.
Could you explain dependence hierarchy a little bit?
Oh yeah, sure. The dependence hierarchy, you can think of it as like a metaphysical org chart. It's that if you have different levels of dependency. So we can take like an example, well, like objects like folders and people and trees and stuff. They would be like probably all at the same basic level. So, I mean, true, we need trees to breathe, but metaphysically, we don't depend on trees to exist or folders to exist. So at that level, we're at the same level of this dependency hierarchy. Now, at a higher level up, if you believe in like space-time, you would need space-time for us to be in. So if you think things can't exist apart from space and time, we are substances relative to like folders and trees, but relative to space-time, we're not, because we depend on space-time. Now, If there are multiple spacetimes, then they would be substances relative to each other, because if they didn't need each other to exist. And then above them might be like, maybe there's like a, you know, the ultraverse or something that contains, you know, all the spacetimes. And then above all that could be God. And God could be like a prime substance in the sense that it would be the thing that can exist by itself. It depends on nothing else, and everything else depends on it. Yeah, so there'd be the dependency. It's like, again, like, kind of like an org chart. It'd be like, you know, here's God, and then all the other stuff. And then at that corporate, at that level, like in a corporate hierarchy, the things would all be substances potentially relative to each other, if they could exist apart from each other. And then at each higher level, they would depend on those. So relative to me, we'd both be substances, because we don't metaphysically depend on each other. But relative to space-time, we wouldn't be, because we depend on that. And then space-time might be dependent on like the multiverse, and then multiverse would be dependent on God. And if God depends on nothing, then he would be the prime substance. Or PS, as his friends call it.
So do atoms fall out of substance? And that, like, if we were to completely remove carbon, then we wouldn't really exist?
Oh, like destroying things?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you destroy them, yeah, then they would just, yeah, there is the question of like, can you actually like completely destroy stuff? And there's kind of two, multiple uses of that. One is, you could change something so it's not what it was before, like it's no longer like the folder. And then there's the thing about complete, like total annihilation, where there is nothing. And interestingly, like further ahead in the paper, one of the objections that's raised is it would seem to be like, you know, bad metaphysics to say there's something that can't be destroyed. But of course, we're told by physics that matter, that energy can't be destroyed. Yeah, things maybe like if they lost certain features, they might stop being substances. They might not be able to exist independently anymore.
So when you destroy matter, it turns into energy, and energy can't be destroyed, right?
Yeah, well, supposedly matter and energy can't be destroyed. You can convert matter to energy, and I guess energy to matter. We don't know how to exactly. Oh, in a way, we're working on that. Yeah, but supposedly it just transitions. You know, the total sum of the universe remains constant, supposedly. Nothing, it doesn't increase, doesn't decrease.
So it's turned into something else, another form.
Yeah, so if you have, you know, if you think of the universe like a big bucket, the contents of the bucket, well, what's in the bucket remains, you know, doesn't lose anything. Nothing gets out of the bucket. Now, what the stuff that's going on in there can change, you know, various combinations, but everything's still in the bucket. Nothing is lost, supposedly.
Full bucket is a full bucket.
Yeah. Yep. So why do people want substances? Well, we've seen this before. Now, one way to do like a substance is with bundles. You would say that if you accept the trope theories, you get a bunch of tropes and you get them kind of bundled together, however that works, and that would be like your substance. So the folder would be like all tropes, just made up of like blue tropes, the, you know, shape tropes, etc. And so it'd just be a bunch of tropes metaphysically. The other option, of course, is that you've got the tropes, then you have this weird, mysterious substrata, you know, the Mr. Potato Head or Mrs. Potato Head underneath all the things that are stuck in it. Now, why do we need substances? Well, one reason for this is, as we saw, is again, you know, kind of the argument we've heard all along, we don't find properties just floating off on their own. You can't walk into a room and step in blue. You can step in blue something, blue paint, blueberries, etc., but not just like blue. And similarly, you can't have just like mass or pitch just hanging out by itself, as far as we know. Now, so because of that, we can't have single tropes, like a single color trope being a substance. Because you don't think like blue could just be hanging out. Like you go in a room and it's like, there's blue. It's not blue, blue's clues, but blueness itself. Now, Well, you never forget the clues from the blues.
Gotcha.
And Clifford, the big red dog, so there's blue dogs and red dogs, and it's politics basically. They should have blue and red Clifford do like the political commentary. That'd be awesome for the 2018 election.
Oh, Lord.
That would be hilarious. Now, relational properties, tropes, we shouldn't accept them as substances either. Because, for example, you can't have just like 5 feet to the left of just hanging up by itself. You gotta to have that making sense, you gotta have one thing that's 5 feet to the left of something else. You just can't have relations existing with nothing to relate, or at least intuitively. It'd be like, to use an illustration, you couldn't have motherhood without mothers and children. You just couldn't have like a bucket of motherhood.
So tropes are more like characteristics still.
Yeah, they're properties. So inequality, like, blue, human, so any quality or property would potentially be a trope. Now, you can accept tropes without committing to like a particular view about like what exactly would be an individual trope. Like, are colors actually metaphysical properties? Maybe, maybe not. Is there really like a metaphysical property of like motherhood? Probably not. Also, they saw single tropes just hanging by themselves won't do. So what we need is, we need at least multiple tropes together, because you always find things that have multiple properties, multiple qualities. So it seems that because of that, we gotta have substances. Now, going back to the ancient days of the before time, we saw that one of the methods for doing metaphysics is our good dad for Enoch, who said, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. So if you have a theory that can get as much done with less, better theory. So it would seem that bundles, the main argument for bundle theory, if you like tropes, is you just have your tropes, and you don't need that substrata, and so you're ahead economically. You get, if you can do all the stuff that tropes with substrata can do without substrata, you get an advantage of economy. So in order to beat that, you have to show that the economy is a false one. That even though initially it seems like an advantage, when you have one less metaphysical type, that it actually can't get things done. To use a crappy analogy, it'd be kind of like buying a car with only 3 wheels, for less. Initially, it might seem like a good price, but then you're going to find out that having a car with just 3 wheels, it's supposed to have 4, is not going to work really. So, what's the argument for this stuff? Well, as you might imagine, you can use a regress argument. This is a pretty useful tool for metaphysics. So, and of course we got to use Greek symbols, because it's not philosophy. Let's throw in some Greek symbols. So you have object sigma having tropes A and B, object delta having tropes C and D. Now, merely having A, B, C, and D is not enough to account for sigma being A and B and delta being C and D. To use a Legos example. If you have Legos, just like in a bag, oh, well, yeah, well, I can put it as a question. So what's the difference between just like a bunch of Legos in a bag and actually having, like actual things like the Millennium Falcon or Harry Potter's School of Burgers and Wizardry?
Both are a bunch of objects.
Oh, well, what's the difference between just like a bag of Legos and the Millennium Falcon Lego version?
One is a symbol, which looks like a form.
Yeah.
And the other is just like it has potential to be a symbol into other things.
Yeah, exactly. So if someone said, you want to see my cool Millennium Falcon, Lego version, they show you like a bag of Legos, you're probably like, that's pretty disappointing. Yeah, so there's got to be something that takes the parts and assembles them together. So you need something to group them to actually make objects. So in the case of the Lego analogy, there's gonna be something that takes all the pieces together and makes them into distinct objects, the separate things. Now, so you need more than just the parts. Like going with the Legos, you need more than just a loose bag of Legos. And so kind of the question is, using the Lego metaphor, are Legos, can you think of them like, can you think of tropes as being like Legos where they can just stick together on their own? Or do you need something else to stick them, connect them together, like glue, for example? And so kind of the question to be is, are substances like collections of Legos, or like jigsaw puzzles, or are they like, the old model kits where you actually have to glue stuff together, or like a car. Like you can just take a car and just push all the stuff together. It's gotta be, well
That
done.
would be wonderful.
It would be wonderful. So, the cheap option is, of course, the bundle. And you could build a pretty sophisticated bundle theory which doesn't allow for tropes to be free-ranging on the loose, doing terrible things. Then the question is, what is it that's going to hold them together? And again, you can think of the bundle model, the Lego example. I should have thought of that years ago, but it's grad school, so I'm thinking about Legos. But with Legos, all you need to hold Legos together is more Legos. They just connect together. And so this is seen to be more economical. Now, of course, the thing about Legos is they can exist off separately on their own. It's usually moving out during the night to get under your foot, so you can step on it. The sharper, the better. So what binds them together? Well, since the bundle theorist just wants to have bundles and none of that substrata stuff, they can't have tropes plus binder. They can't have tropes plus the glue. Because otherwise they end up embracing just substrata, because they end up with two things. So they end up with basically two options. So option one, what they can do is they can say, yeah, they're bound together like Legos stuck together to form the Millennium Falcon, but the binder is not real. Now the problem with this goes back to our good dead friend Plato. Plato addressed the question of what is it that makes things real? Which is a good question. And his answer is this. Something is real means that it has any kind of power to affect anything else or be affected by it in even a tiny degree, in even just once. But if it does that, then it is real. If it can't do that, then it's not real. So his view is that it is, real things are nothing but power. So,
Say that again. Anything real is nothing but power.
Yeah. With the ability to do, or to do unto others, or have them, or to be done unto. It can get stuff done. As who's that comedian, get her done, cable guy? So, the problem with the binder that's not real is it's doing stuff, and that would seem to make it real. So saying I get a real binder but it's not real would seem to be a contradiction. It'd be like someone's, it's like you're trying to pull apart their Lego creation, you can't do it, and they say, well, they're glued together, but glue's not real. It's like, well, what? But option two. You could have binding tropes, in which everything you get is a trope, so it's all tropes. Just like in the Lego movie, everything is awesome. In this case, the less successful song was everything is tropes. Trope movie probably not a great success. Unless Michael Bay did, then it'd be like well, it'd be terrible. That'd be terrible. Now, this has the economic advantage, because what things are on the list of things in the universe? Tropes. So you have one type of thing. Now, this may seem kind of cool, but of course it ends up in terrible disaster. And as you might imagine, the disaster takes the form of a regress. And here's how the regress regresses. Now, so, oh, I'm destroying all these worlds. I feel kind of evil. Oh, and God too. Sad. Just a little bit. It's cool. He's still around. So, supposedly these are tropes, drawing circles. And they claim as well, what holds them together is binding tropes that connect them together. It's kind of like, well, like glue. So the idea is, it'd be like if you had glue made of Legos, Lego glue. So everything would be Lego, you'd have the Lego pieces, and you'd have also glue made of Lego that sticks them together. Or like the other thing I have from when I was a kid, the Hot Wheel orange tracks. I don't know if they still make them, but they had these little purple things, and you'd stick them in the track to hold them together, and they bind them together. Ancient toys, the Hot Wheels. They still make those things?
Do they make Hot Wheels?
I saw them in Ant-Man and the Wasp.
I think they still make them, just not the same as they used to.
Or make them out of cocaine. That's why they're hot. Yeah, exactly, they're really fast. So the idea is you have like this binding trope that binds things together. Now, at first glance, it seems to make sense. You have the glue metaphor, okay, hot gluing these things together, maybe some glitter glue, everything is green and sparkly. But here comes the problem. If you have to have tropes bound together by binding tropes, that means that your binding trope has to be bound itself. So the binder trope has to be bound to a binding trope that binds to the trope, but then of course you gotta put in another one in there, and then another one, and another one, because the tropes have to be bound, even your binding tropes have to be bound.
Say that again now.
No.
If you got two tropes and you put a binding trope between them.
Yeah, because the response is, well, okay, we can solve the problem. So here's like your two, let's take like, this is like a blue trope, this is like a rectangular trope. And then we have a binding trope, well actually I'll use green so it doesn't get more confusing. And then we have our binding trope here, and it connects them together. Now, but if our deal is tropes have to be bound, so they're not like loose, free roaming, and every trope has to be bound to something, that means there's gotta be something that binds the binding trope to the,
Well, you're binding the binding trope to the trope.
Right, but the way binding works though is it's gotta be a quality. So the binding trope itself has to be bound.
So that's the same thing as A equals A, B equals B.
Yeah, it's a regress. A requires B. Like so, you got to stick in. It'd be like if you had glue that only worked if it was glued to glue. So you'd have to keep pouring on the glue, and what would happen?
You would never get to the product.
Yeah, you'd have you just have a huge mess of glue. So you keep sticking them on there forever to infinity, and so you need an infinite number of tropes. So this goes bad in two possible ways. Problem one, you'll need an infinite number of bindings to have the binding occur. So you need like an infinite amount of glue to glue the glue to the glue to glue the things. And of course that's not gonna work. So no binding. The second problem is, even if you said, okay, yeah, this works by like some kind of magic, you'd end up with an infinite number of binding tropes, which would just be crazy. Yep, so that seems crazy. So what you need is an unbound binder, kind of like the unmoved movement. You need something that binds, that itself does not need to be bound. So you need a glue, like you need a glue that works like normal glue. That you just put the glue on the thing and it sticks to it. Now there is kind of glue like that. Have you ever used some versions of a Gorilla Glue? You gotta like put glue like on
With the hardener.
Yeah, put it on and then put it on the side, and then you gotta, the glue only sticks to like the glue. So you have to like put them together. This would be like a case where you can only glue to glue, you know, forever. Just be gluing. People, that'd be the worst glue. The reason Amazon would be like, worst glue ever. So we need something that binds but is not bound. And we've established that tropes can't be out free roaming by themselves. And if they could exist unbound, we wouldn't need binders. But of course the problem is that would mean some could free roam by themselves, and that doesn't work. Now what we could try to do is say, well, all tropes must be bound except the binding tropes. They don't need to be bound. It's like everybody's subject to the law except that guy. Well, if it can be done in a principled way, if you can give actual reasons why this should be so, that's fine. But if not, you get to use a cool Latin phrase, well, cool in a nerd kind of way. Actually not really cool at all, but it's a classic ad hoc. And an ad hoc essentially is roughly put just kind of, I mean, normal life they often talk about like, this is an ad hoc setup, and you just kind of throw them together. But in this case, it means that it's something that's presented just to solve the problem without any other justification. It's like you get a problem, you just throw that in there and say, well, we gotta have this because it solves it, and the only justification is that saying that it's there solves the problem.
So it's a magical union.
Yeah, essentially it's magic. You know, it's basically solving by magic. Metaphorically, it's kind of like the Deus Ex in theater, where in movies where the problem is just solved, no coherent explanation, no clear reason. So if we just say, yeah, all tropes got to be bound except this trope doesn't have to be bound because it's a binding trope, unless they can give a good justification, that would just be ad hoc, just done to avoid the problem. Now, if, however, we make the binding trope like different enough from other tropes, then we might suspect that it's not a trope at all, it's a substrata. It's kind of like if someone says they're not a liar, but they never tell the truth, and they maliciously say false things. It's like, well, that's lying. It's like the old saying about walks like a duck, talks like a duck, and it's probably a chihuahua. I assume that's how the saying works.
Sounds familiar.
The chihuahua hypothesis. Now, so we've seen that the binding cannot be bound by tropes because of rigorous problems. So what do? Well, we need a binder. We need a glue to hold things together. So the thing to do, to use the Legos metaphor, if we want our Legos to be stuck together, then we need glue. And the glue is different from the Legos. Now, what the bundle theorists could do is try to save themselves to this point. As you might recall from the ancient days in wartime, every theory gets to have primitives, where you don't actually analyze or explain it, you just say, gotta have this, I can't account for it, explain it, but I need to have it. And it's a fair move because everybody needs primitives, because otherwise you'd be explaining for effort. So you gotta have a starting point. Now you can, of course, as we saw, you can argue about, is one primitive better than the other? Is it, more plausible, more appealing? But everybody gets, primitives. To use an analogy, it's like everyone gets to bat, gets, 3 strikes. You just get it. So one option the bundle theorists could say is, well, binding is just primitive, totally unexplained. It just binds. Now again, this seems like ad hoc. They're just saying it just does. They just stick together. It's primitive. Why they do that? No explanation. Now, of course, what counts as ad hoc and what is a brilliant solution, as you might imagine, can depend quite a bit on your perspective. Because if you like bundles, you'd say, yeah, it makes perfect sense. But the problem is essentially saying, the binding is a primitive, the tropes are tropes, and so you end up with basically in a trap, because if you have tropes that bind just do, and they're a special exception, and it's a primitive, they end up essentially being substrata. So they're just substrata by another name. It'd be like someone saying, I'm not a liar, I just maliciously say untruths knowingly all the time. Well, they don't understand the word. Now the price, of course, one could say would be too high. Now, of course, one should never give up in philosophy and never surrender. And so one could try again to say that, you know, the economic argument, just taking it as primitive, saves, you know, ontological currency. But again, then the problem is, you gotta say that it does a real thing, but it's not real. And so that doesn't seem plausible. Yeah, because if it's doing things, it's got to be real. We now turn to a bit from Armstrong. I think he's dead. Met him once before he was dead. Nice guy, Australian.
You said you met him?
Yeah, yep. And I got invited to do actually present this paper at Davidson, and they brought in David Armstrong was like a guest teaching there. He said I was a good writer. I think he was just being kind. Hey, he's one of the big names in philosophy. But if you're not in philosophy, you never. It's like, again, being famous in philosophy is like being famous in curling. You know, there is somebody who is a gold medalist in curling. Google knows, but none of the rest of us know. Now, Armstrong argued that the trope substrata view is better. Why? Well, tropes, he claims, are not suitable to be substances. That just having them, again, existing on their own. You know, some points we've seen before. Namely, you know, one reason we saw previously is that you can't have just relations off by themselves. Like, you can't have a universe that has like motherhood, but no mothers and no children, or to the left of with nothing to relate. Like if you go to like Walmart and say, I need to purchase a bag of to the left of, they're like,
What?
yeah, to the left of. I mean, you're not gonna find that at Walmart. And that's, you gotta have two things that are being related.
But what?
Yeah. So, property tropes cannot be substances. Now, another option that Armstrong is critical of is that what some people try to do is kind of build up their tropes, make them more robust, maybe get some steroids or something. And he points out correctly that if you start putting in qualities to make them substances, you know, shape, size, duration, then in a way you're making them seem to be tropes as well. So you end up with what is supposed to be a single trope actually being like multiple tropes. And so he contends, correctly I think, that they won't do as substances. Now, he then raises another problem, which is the problem of basically minimal entities. What is the least thing that can exist on its own? You know, going back to like talking about like destroying things, how far could you like take things away from something before taking away anything more would just take it out of existence? You know, the minimal entity. It's also kind of like when you're talking about having a sword that can cut anything, you know, anything cuttable. Like how far could you cut until you hit something that could not be cut, even by the sword that can cut anything. Now, so a trope by itself, like blue, can't hang out on its own. But as Armstrong points out correctly, if you have like a blue trope stuck on a substrata, that's equally problematic. Because saying, look, you know, blue trope stuck on a, you know, like you know, cheese on a cracker, although cheese and crackers can exist, delicious. this wouldn't work in engine, something like blue stuck on the substrate. So that doesn't work either. So substances would have to be something robust. What is the minimum amount of stuff you gotta have to actually be? And going back to the question I raised earlier, you start tearing away stuff from something, like pulling out like the carbon, all the other stuff. At what point would you have, you know, not, you know, where the last thing you pulled away would be, you'd be left with nothing. Now, in the bundle view, you would have to have minimal bundles. It'd be like the least qualities there could be. Like what would be the smallest number of qualities a thing could have and still be? And the answer is, I don't know. But in a way, the physics, when they're trying to like, the big colliders, they're basically doing this. They're trying to like break stuff and see how far they can break things. And hoping that when they break something, it won't destroy the universe. Non-zero chance of destroying the universe. Oh, when they were working on the atomic bomb, there's a possibly an urban myth, but there was some concern that once the reaction started, they wouldn't be able to stop it. So everything would, the entire Earth would go up in nuclear fission, and the entire world would be destroyed. But it was such a cool experiment. How could you not do that? It's like when you get fireworks. You know, how can you not set them off? You know, something like that could
That
happen.
was big fireworks.
Yeah, would have been the biggest fireworks on Earth. Now, so with the bundle view, would say you got to have like a bundle of tropes. Substrata view, you would have, you know, that same stuff, but this time it would be on the substrata, you know, cracker, or whatever metaphor you want to use. So there are two questions that Armstrong raises here. One is, what would be a minimal substance? It's a question of what is the least thing in the universe? Now, we have some idea like of really small things, but we found that even, you know, at the atomic level, there's even things smaller, and maybe things smaller than that. Yeah. And then people talk about the quantum level, which at that point they're just making stuff up. Not like an Ant-Man, you know, that it wants. It just looks cool. Question two, one of the things that people have noticed is that there are certain qualities that are not the same quality, but they're always found together. For example, every color must have hue and saturation, but hue is not saturation, saturation is not hue, but you can never have a color without both. Same with like pitch and volume. They're not the same thing, because you can alter them, you know, apart from each other, but you never find them apart. You know, every sound has to have a certain pitch and a certain volume, but they're not the same quality. And so that raises an interesting problem as well. Like how do these qualities relate to each other? You know, how does hue and saturation, why do they always have to be stuck together? And the answer is, we don't know. Now, fortunately, this is a scenario where.
Well, if they didn't, it'd be all the same, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I guess you would have, yeah. I guess
I
everything
mean,
would be the
because
same.
a color without a hue, you have all one color.
True.
Sound without a pitch would be all the same.
Yeah, all the same sound,
So,
or no sound at all. Now, this is a case where this is a question that doesn't, well, basically it's a problem that for everybody, although it's not really a problem, it's more of a challenge. And one sort of logical principle is, if you're picking between options, and all of the options have the same problem, that problem doesn't give you any reason to pick one over the other. Like I gave the example before. If there are, you know, two people running for Senate, and you know, at this point they're the only two people you can vote for, and it turns out they're both adulterers. Well, you can't count adultery if you're counting. I mean, yeah, they probably shouldn't be doing adultery, but you can't count it against one in particular. So you can't say I'm not voting for Ted because he's an adulterer, because if Sally's also an adulterer. So it's a thing that's bad, but it doesn't give you any particular reason against one of them because they're the same thing. Or like if you're trying to pick between, two smartphones and they're both expensive. Well, if those are the only two you're interested in, being expensive is not a special problem because they're both expensive. Now Armstrong contends, correctly I think, that there doesn't seem to be any reason to think that this will work out better for bundles or Substrata. So everyone's got to answer it, so it's not any particular problem for anyone, and there's no reason to think that any particular view will have an advantage or disadvantage here. So it's kind of a tie game in this problem. But it does indicate that we need to have robust substances and have to come up with an answer as to why that works. And as classic line for going into academics, the phrase, "This is beyond the scope of this essay," critical phrase. Okay, so that brings us into the stuff today. When you meet again in the future, we'll go on to some more stuff. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you on the Friday.